Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Kerbal Space Program 2. This is a game that we're having a look at today. So this is just a bit of a general overview. I've spent a couple of hours with the game. I'm going to chop a bit of that footage together and give you my thoughts from the sort of opening of this. My background, I've played a chunk of Kerbal. I'm not exactly fantastic at it, and I was very late to the party as well. And while I do have a bit of an engineering background and I gravitate towards these sort of games, I'm in no way sort of a hardcore sweat for it or anything like that. Now, that's nothing against a lot of the other main Kerbal channels that are out there, but generally speaking, it's a very hardcore niche, whereas I'm probably a little bit more entry level, which is probably a good thing for people that maybe are a bit scared of this game. Because I will say straight at the top, the work that they've done doing all the front-end tutorials at generally new player experience, which I'm not sure the other channels will cover quite so much, it's fantastic. It's actually perfectly done. I reckon they've hired the same animator from does the Kurtzegats channel. God, is that how you pronounce it? You should look it up. That's fantastic, but everyone should know about that channel. They have these really cute animated tutorials married in with very small scenarios. Probably takes you an hour to get through them all, and it teaches you the basics of orbital mechanics. I was actually really blown away by how welcoming and low level yet accessible they have managed the mechanics of Kerbal, because they're not very easy, especially if you're in the early goings and you don't understand how to do maneuver nodes or any of these sort of the quality of life things that you need to really understand the fundamentals behind them before you can really put them to use. So it does a really good job of introducing the idea of staging all the way up to doing sort of transfers from one orbit to another, like out to the moon. And I'll show some footage here. It's great. It's not trying to teach you like hardcore physics or anything like that, but it just gives you very basic relativity and how that relates to, getting your rocket up into orbit, deorbiting, and potentially shifting orbit to another planet. Performance-wise, I would brace myself if I was you. I'm running on a bit of a beast rig, and it was still fairly choppy on high-end graphics. It is interesting, right, because Kerbal has that sort of, cartoony, whimsical appeal, and yet it's sort of rendering a lot of the parts in like a high fidelity, not really uncanny valley, because the Kerbans are still Kerbans, but the actual assets are much more closer to realism. It does create a little bit of an uncanny valley look where you've got these cartoon characters flying around in what looks like real parts. But at the same time, I actually like it. I think it looks phenomenal. The environments and all that, like the planets seem like maybe they need a bit more work, but the individual parts are pretty awesome. It's probably safe to say it's not super well optimized. You're going to get hitching. I've had some crashing. I've been running on like a side-chained launcher because it's not really integrated with Steam yet. And while, that could just be a quirk of their particular launch, I do this a lot with a lot of different games, and that's kind of uncommon. Might sort of give you an idea that like just even interacting with the launcher and the compatibility, the front end and dealing with the actual engine, it might be a lot more alpha than maybe a lot of other early access games that you see. There's no career mode. It's all fairly limited from that perspective. However, from a sandbox perspective, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of planets sort of implemented, all these parts. It is just a smorgasbord, right? So there's no limiters, which are things that I personally enjoy. I like the idea of having to progress and tech through. However, it has implemented a lot of really good quality of life stuff like a trip planner. So you can sort of plug in, hey, I want to go from Kerbal to the moon or to one of these other planets. You can say I want a round trip, and it will actually give you the Delta V projections, but in real time inside the game engine, so that you can build all your vessels around it. So I've been poking and prodding with that. Now, these Delta V tables have existed in the community for a long time. It's cool to see them implemented in the actual game. But from that, you can kind of go, well, I'm gonna get a full orbit around Kerbin. Okay, now I'm gonna go and switch orbit to Moon and maybe do a return trip. So you can actually set your own sort of goalposts, I suppose. It's not ideal, but it's something that I feel like a lot of the already hardcore community is probably gonna do. Can I get these guys out to this planet and land them and take off again? From what I understand as well, there's no like base building or any of that sort of implemented, and I'm pretty sure it's all still isolated to the single solar system. There's only so much I can cover in the time that I've got. So a lot of it will be about orbiting planets with your own custom design, landing and taking off. That's it. However, like I said, depending on how much you're into this sort of genre, that's actually quite a bit of content. Is this just a reskin of Kerbal 1? Well, I mean, I think Greater Minds could answer that question. It doesn't seem to be from what I understand. It absolutely looks different, plays similarly. I'm actually finding a lot of the elements way more dumb player friendly. I don't know how else to word that. The UI has changed. Has it changed for the sake of change? Well, I mean, thematically, it has this sort of through line, this kind of retro neon futurism that you see a lot in these days. It's very cool to go down this sort of retro path. It ties in with the tutorials and the soundtrack as well. That is probably something very cool and worth mentioning. Apparently, all the different planets have like their own sort of ambient soundtrack that pop off, especially when you're landing. One of the cool things is that you have like a launch countdown and it has a swelling soundtrack and you can just sort of let that, you press fire and let the launch. It's almost a cutscene in a way, seeing all the systems fire up and then the rocket taken off with the swelling soundtrack. It's a cool touch. It's a cool bit of polish that never existed in the first game. There is quite a bit of that sort of punchy retro synth soundtrack thrown into the tutorial experience. It's probably worth mentioning I've had a couple of crashes, at least 2 big ones, and that's a lot for the short amount of time I've spent with it. It is obviously a pre-release build that I'm looking at, but I am also just saying, set your expectations. This game is rough and it's content thin, and I think a lot of people buying into it understand that you're buying into the pedigree. I'm not saying it's a bad product or anything like that. I'm just saying it's a fairly content thin early stage. Let's be honest, if you weren't Kerbal, if you didn't have the pedigree behind it and the fan base, the rabid install base that are very keen for it, you probably wouldn't get away with this. If you were a one-man developer in a garage, you probably would actually get smashed pretty hard for not fantastic performance and not a whole lot of content. However, the promise is there. I think that just about covers it. But yeah, to put a bow on it, a lot of potential, a lot of promise. Very early, very rough, but you can see the nugget in there. You can see the gem. I suppose it's just a matter of time. Is it worth going out and buying it straight away? Well, that's a tough one to say, right? If you're remotely curious, but you're not a Kerbal fan, you probably just want to get Kerbal 1. I mean, why wouldn't you? And let this cook for a little bit longer. If you're a hardcore Kerbal fan, you've already pre-ordered this probably as well anyway. So I think it's probably safe to say this is exactly what people thought it was going to be, for better or for worse. So that's my general sort of thoughts and overview of KSP2. We'll keep an eye on it. Maybe we'll revisit it as more content gets added. I love the Kerbal games. I really do. But this is very much play it for a couple of hours and then maybe put it back on the bench and just let it ruminate for a little bit. Let it cook. Let the developers do their thing. If you enjoy this format, let me know. We've been, flirting with different ways of presenting games. I'm becoming quite fond of this. Just taking an overview from a couple of hours to give people an idea of what they're in for. If you want to support the channel, doing the whole, like, share, subscribe, all that sort of crap is probably pretty helpful. Joining up as a member is very, very helpful. But yeah, that should probably cover it. So we might just leave it there for the time being, and I will catch you guys on the next one.